Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and joining me tonight, via Skype, of course, because we are practicing social distancing. In fact, we're on opposite sides of the country, we're so distant, but we definitely won't get each other sick. Ladies and gentlemen, a true blue Spookaroo, Susan Barrett.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. We're probably, 3,000? We're about as socially distant as you can be on this continent.
Yeah,
Good work.
Hey, listen.
Good work, us.
No one's getting sick because of us. Yeah, so obviously the big subject these days is the coronavirus. So far, I've been able to stay healthy. So far, I've been able to stay employed, although, as I learned just through a text that I got right before we started recording, that might be changing. But it's all a waiting game, and it seems like it's that way for a lot of people. So I was just saying to Susan, I think I always hate it when people say, if it makes you feel any better, and then they say something terrible about their own life. Because it's like, why would that make me feel better to know that someone that I, like is like also having a hard time? But in this case, it really does make you feel better because the whole world is having a lot of the same issues. Like, even if you're healthy, you might be out of a job or something like that. And there's a whole lot of people facing that situation. So I'm not alone there, and I actually have some advantages. We don't need to go into my whole life issues, but yeah, so I'm not panicking just yet, but I am going to be calling my boss once Susan and I are done talking and seeing if I have a job to get paid from.
Yeah, as a small business owner, we're keeping our employees working from home, and it seems like they have enough stuff to do. And I'm a little bit panicking about the abyss in front of me, but we'll just see. We're going to talk through it. We're going to explore where it's going to go and see where the discussion takes us. Yeah.
And I think, in a way, I didn't even want to talk about the coronavirus because, it's a bummer, and it's everywhere and you can't avoid it. You're going to hear about it. We're all living, around the world, people are living in their homes almost exclusively these days. And, it's not like a fun thing to talk about. But on the other hand, maybe it will kind of help all of us process it if we do talk about it. And, of course, here we're going to be a little bit irreverent. I did say, there is a danger of me losing, not my job. My job will be there whenever this goes away. And the good news is it will go away. I'll have my job when we return. However, in the meantime, am I going to get paid? That's the big issue right now. But, I'm like I said, I have some advantages, and that include the fact that I'm not alone in this world, and I've got people I can turn to and places I can go if worst comes to worst. So, c'est la vie. It is like we just said. You just have to take it. It seems like every week something very dramatic changes, because it seems like at first they were just like, wash your hands, make sure you keep your distance a little bit, and you should be good. And then the next week they're like, don't go outside.
Right. It went from, we had somebody who was in contact with somebody who had come back from Italy, and the discussion kind of went from, oh, they weren't in that part of it, to dear God, stay the fuck home. Oh, it just really, really ratcheted up very quickly.
But there are some kind of fun things that you get to see and learn about in a time like this. Like when you go to the grocery store, you see what people think they will really need to weather a storm like this. And I have to say, some of the choices I'm not so sure about.
I mean, I'm sure toilet paper has kind of been discussed to death as why that versus the various other things that might seem like more necessary, whatever, immediate, etc. But I went in pretty early on, and I haven't been able to buy a thermometer that works, because of course all the ones in my house are broken. So, we're just going off of the, well, I guess you don't feel that hot method. But yeah, there's weird stuff that's just completely emptied out.
I was surprised, maybe not surprised, but well, just to the fact of like literally every store that I've gone to, there's no pasta, and I guess that makes sense.
Oh,
but it's literally it's as bad as the toilet paper shelves, like nothing.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, and I don't know if I want to brag about this too much on the podcast, but as a Northern Californian, I don't eat gluten, and so I kind of am going in just like scurrying and getting whatever I can find, because I've got a little bit of a fear about that, and that's a whole other thing I should probably, maybe I'm the hoarder of Sonoma County, but I don't know.
I just went in. I have my own weird things, but I went in. I stocked up on oatmeal because that's a good all around.
That's a good one. I did that too. Yeah.
I got like 3 big canisters just in case, and that was really that wasn't even thinking about food's gonna run out. No, I was thinking if I don't get paid, this is a nice cheap thing that will fill me up and I can keep long term. You can tell that I've been poor for a long time.
A depressed person can make it. Like it's pretty, kind of low functioning needed to do that. Yeah, I thought that was an excellent choice.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, this is all appropriate because the subject for tonight is the end of the world. And we're not talking about the coronavirus here, really, as we talk about the end of the world, but just different people who have predicted the end of the world and how it might come and what it could mean for us. And I've got one thing that I'm diving into a little bit more in depth. I haven't even told Susan about it yet, so it's going to be a surprise to her as well. But it was just something I found today while I was researching, something I knew about but kind of forgot about, and we'll see if you remember this too. But we'll get to that. So tonight on Spooky Ass Shit, it's the end of the world. But in real life, of course, we want to stress it's not the end of the world. I tell you each and every week, don't be afraid. And this is a time to be a little bit anxious, maybe. But yes, go ahead.
Sure. It's a yeah, I would say yeah. Anxious, maybe. I don't want to say vigilant yet. Not worried about the purge just yet. Or the toilet paper marauders, but I don't know, we'll see.
Actually, I mean, if we want to talk about toilet paper, I was in a bind because first of all, like the week before all this broke out here, I had bought toilet paper and just the normal, I don't know, whatever I get, like 6-pack or whatever of the Red Charmin. I don't even know what it's called, but it's Red Charmin. That's my brand. And so I live alone, so that should last me a good long time. But, supplies are running low. But I did have some like backup, like cheap 1-ply Scott's toilet paper or something. And it's not really what you want to use, but beggars can't be choosers. And someone had procured that for me. So I was like, well, if it comes to it, I'll use that. And of course, if worse comes to worse, there's always the shower. I don't understand why people like freak out so bad about this. It's not a pleasant thought, but of all the things to worry about.
Yeah. It's like that one's not one you're going to die of.
Yeah. But I did go to Walmart the other day looking for other things actually. But they happen to have toilet paper and Charmin, they had the blue Charmin, not the red Charmin. So I don't know, I haven't used it yet. But
it's it's a time to broaden your horizons, I think.
Strict limits though, you can only get one package of toilet paper. So that must be why they still had a little bit. Wasn't much, but they had enough. So
they have those signs in our stores too about like the one per customer, but I've not seen toilet paper or paper towels on the shelves, but then I haven't actually gone out in a couple days, even to the store. My husband and I were just strategizing right before we started about, okay, I think if we go in the morning, that might be the time. And
all right, but enough about that. We're going to talk about the end of the world right after I tell you about the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place. That is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, even the ones no longer available on your favorite streaming service. And you can find links to our social media. We are at spookyasshit on Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. And you can also join the closed group. It's been a little quiet lately, but maybe now that people are home, we'll see a little more activity. But Susan is not only a founding member, she's the founding member of the Spookaroos group. It was her idea so that we could talk about things without the weight of public judgment on us.
Might be a good time, since we're all stuck at home, for like movie recommendations or things like that, or books too. I've been like doing audiobooks. So maybe that's a Spookaroo topic we could start kind of throwing out there.
I'll kick it off. I saw The Invisible Man before this whole thing broke out, and I did not particularly care for it.
Really hot take. I haven't seen it, but I've heard only good things.
Yeah. No.
If you saw the trailer, then you're good. Yeah. It's one of those kinds of things where the trailer looks pretty good. The real thing, it's got its moments, but
yeah. Anyway, end of the world.
$20 then.
Yeah. Well, it's only $3 or whatever, or maybe I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. Whatever it is on the streaming service.
It is, yeah.
It's all out now.
I mostly am taking this from Wikipedia and their list of dates predicted for apocalyptic events. The end of the world. Now an apocalypse, I guess, is a more specific kind of end of the world, because that's usually has like a religious overtone, right?
That's what just as you were saying that, I was trying to think of examples, and those are the examples I can think of, but I didn't research that.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a true fact or just something I'm making up, but
feels right.
It feels right, because as we go through, we're going to see that a lot of the soothsayers here are of a religious bent. Not all of them, though, so maybe it doesn't, but it is interesting. And the list that I'm talking about here, it only comes from Common Era or After Death, however you want to say it. So it seems to be based around Jesus and the coming of the Messiah, or the second coming of the Messiah, depending who you're asking. I do find it interesting that the first apocalypse listed here actually comes from a Jewish revolutionary by the name of Simon Bar Giora, and that comes from sometime between 66 and 70 Common Era. So that was like just within 30-ish years of the alleged death of Jesus of Nazareth.
But yet was not a follower, was not an apostle, was not a Christian of any sort. He was just a Jewish guy fighting back against Rome, and he said, this is the Battle of Armageddon, so once this battle is over, that's when things are going to change here. It's going to be the end of the world. Turns out he was wrong about that.
Well, yeah, we can assume, yeah.
I mean, that's the good news as we read through these things, and even as we think about today's circumstances. So far, everybody that's predicted the end of the world has been wrong. Unless this is some kind of weird Matrix dream that we're all living in.
That's a topic for a different episode.
Yeah. Now, you wonder why people make these predictions, and there's several reasons why they might. Historically, the most common reasons are that they are diverting attention from actual issues like poverty and war. Gets your mind off those kind of things. It could also be to push a political agenda and or to promote the hatred of a certain group. So for much of Europe, that would be the Jews, as I talked about in an episode, I think from right around this time last year with Jeff Bergeron, my friend in Canada, and the Jewish blood libel. But also, Lutherans would blame Catholics, and Protestants would blame other people. So people are always saying, like, oh, yes, this group is going to cause the end of the world. But also, it's a way of mentally taking all the dangers and evil of the world and putting it into one single source. Kind of like the theory of how the devil came to be. It's that people couldn't believe there was so much bad in the world without any rhyme or reason to it. So if there was this much bad, there had to be a reason, and not a bunch of reasons, but one thing. Just like there's one source of good, there's one source of bad. So people pinning their hopes, not hopes, I guess, but people pinning their troubles to this one source. And also just that humans kind of have it's like a innate sense of fear and anxiety and paranoia and a feeling of powerlessness, some people say. Now, there haven't been like huge studies done on people who do make these kind of predictions, or why they make these predictions. So we don't have a real scientific answer, but it does seem to be that that's part of it. You take those fears and the paranoias and you combine it with the belief in a single, identifiable, definable source, and you can see where that kind of thing would come into play. And finally, they say one of the main reasons people might be making these predictions is because it's kind of exciting and sexy to live in the end times. And this could be all throughout history, but especially now with contemporary apocalyptic fiction. Apocalyptic is one of those words I think I'm going to have trouble saying, by the way.
I'm always afraid I'm going to say it a little bit differently.
I think I've nailed it every time so far, but just be prepared if I mess it up.
There is that kind of that creeping sense that all of our jobs are becoming automated. That I think sort of pushes those questions of like what happens when we just don't really have a purpose anymore, or the just economic models that we have been working under just don't make sense anymore. Like, what is it going to look like? It brings to mind those Twilight Zone episodes, the show that they did in the 80s, where they did a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff, and it was typical because it was the 80s. It would be projecting a future of like approximately now, very tunic heavy, if I remember rightly, and like either I'm beginning of a particular episode that was real environmental heavy, or just like I don't know, that sense of it, like after the thing happens.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, future fashion has never, ever come to pass. Like, anytime you look at anything.
Where's my silver V jumpsuit? It's a very simple, basic garment that goes with everything. You wake up in the morning, you put on your silver V jumpsuit, you are good to go. Day to evening, cocktail party. It looks fabulous.
I mean, no one's stopping you, technically.
This is true. I'm only limiting myself.
You could be the person that ushers in.
Joanne Fabrics is still doing curbside delivery.
So there are they have a huge list in the article that I was reading of people and the times that they predicted the end of the world, and they go by not when the person was making the prediction, but when they predicted the end of the world to be. So that's the order.
That answers a question then. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the order I'm going to be going.
I was like, where are the Mayans in this mix? But all right, that answers my question.
Well, Mayans, okay, so they actually weren't on the list.
Because I guess, I don't know for sure, but my understanding is that technically they didn't predict the end of the world. Their calendar just happened to stop in what some people have translated as 2012.
I see. Okay, so all right, we'll let them off on that technicality.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's the fact or not, but some people are saying like, no, that's just as far as they went. They weren't going to keep making a calendar forever and ever and ever.
I mean, it makes some sense.
Yeah. So that's what I've heard about that one. But So, like I said, most of the people that make predictions are making them in some kind of religious context and saying that, when this thing happens or because this thing happened, that means that the Messiah is coming or the Messiah is coming back. And it doesn't seem to matter which religion, except that this article really talks about the Abrahamic religions of Judaism and all the branches of Christianity. And it's usually like splinter groups. It's not usually like the Protestants say the world's going to end on this day, or all Jewish people think the world's going to end this day, or all Catholics think this is the date. It's usually not like that. There are a couple of exceptions to that. But the other thing is there are certain events in history that will trigger these kind of, doomsday predictions. Of course, anytime a century occurs, that's going to pop up the number of apocalyptic guesses. Anytime it's a new millennium, then the numbers really start to spike. But also things that happen in the world. For example, in 1346, all the way through 1351, we have the Black Death, the plague spreading across Europe. And this was interpreted by many to be a sign of the end of times. And obviously that was a real rough period of time. I forget the exact number, but it's like 1/3 of the world's population. That might be an exaggeration, but
something like that.
A healthy segment, yeah. Or,
the world's population, did not survive.
I can understand, and I bet if they're not doing it already, which I'm sure there are, some of those evangelical preachers are taking to their YouTube videos or their virtual
I'm sure,
and talking about how this is a sign of the end, and now this is, so and so is coming, and this is it.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. I've mostly hidden those people on Facebook, but I'm sure they're out there.
So the next thing we have is Martin Luther in 1600. He said that 1600 would be the end of the world. Martin Luther, of course, is the, I don't know if you'd call him the founder, but the Lutheran Church, and also Protestantism and these kinds of things, separated from the Catholic Church over the, paying to get out of sin and all. So he predicted that it would occur no later than 1600. So it might come before that, but not after that. This one was a surprise to me. Christopher Columbus got into the prophecy game. He wrote a book in 1501 called The Book of Prophecies, which was like a religious kind of text, and it was based on religion, and the prophecies he was making were based on religion. This was later in his life, after he was done exploring and all. But in it, he predicted that the world would end during the year 1656.
And speaking of a man who's wrong about a lot of things, are we taking our prophecies from Christopher Columbus?
Yeah, well.
Anyway, but I digress.
Well, again, it's so funny to me that a lot of these are like religious based. Even Christopher Columbus, who's not known for being like a religious guy, but, that's not what he's known for. A lot of these are religion based, and yet, I don't claim to be an expert on the Bible, but having grown up Catholic and doing this show and researching the Bible for many things, because that's the culture I grew up in, was the Christian culture, Catholic specifically. I do know a little bit, and I know that the Bible tells you that no man knows when the end is coming. Jesus said that himself.
As somebody who is admittedly less educated on what the Bible actually says, for sure, having never read it cover to cover, but I think there's ways in which government plus religion plus fear creates a large amount of power. I feel like if somebody decides to put those three things together to get people to behave in a certain manner, that could be a powerful strategy.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. Well, especially, too, when you consider that for most of history, regular Joes weren't reading the Bible. They couldn't. They didn't have the option.
Right.
You know? So they would say, no, in this book that you're not allowed to read and only I can interpret, it says this.
Exactly.
But I do know for a fact, having been a cast member in Godspell as well, and seen it many, many times and done lights for it for one production of Godspell. I'm very familiar with Godspell, and it's taken from the book of Mark, I believe. And I do specifically remember Jesus talking about how no man can know when the end of the world is coming or when the Messiah will return. So basically his point is, like, you can't just like be good at the last minute. You got to be good all the time, right? Jesus is coming, look busy, that kind of thing. Like, that's not going to fly. You got to be busy all the time.
So I don't know. To me, it's just funny that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That it's mostly like religious people that say this kind of thing.
But they're completely making it up, and it is it an example of somebody saying like, well, God spoke directly to me. It's not in the Bible, but I found these missing pages, or I had a dream, or so-and-so told me, or I'm the saint of whatever it is. And it appeared in my toast.
Yeah.
So this next guy, he does something that's very unusual for the most part. We've seen cases of it like recently, but for the most part, this is a bit unusual. He predicted the end of the world would occur in his own lifetime. And that's usually a big mistake if you're kind of like a prognosticator, because of course then when it doesn't come true, you're wrong.
You're standing right there, right?
Yeah. And this is a man we've heard about before on this show. His name is Cotton Mather.
He's a Puritan minister, and he was involved, not as heavily as he would like to have you believe, but he was involved in the Salem witch trials. So he predicted that the world would come to an end in 1697. And when that didn't happen, he changed his answer to 1716. And then when that didn't happen, he finally wised up and changed it to a time after he'd be around, although not too long, so 1736.
You might be a cult leader if...
The next one is interesting because, like I was saying, there are a few exceptions to the rule about religions. Religions don't usually, state when they believe the world is going to end. Yeah. Except like some kind of like extreme groups, But the Jehovah's Witnesses did predict that the world would end in 1941. It's just interesting to me that, usually, like we said, it's one wacko who might have his own followers for one reason or another. Like the next guy we're going to talk about. But this was a full-on religion. Although maybe at the time when they made this prediction, they weren't a full-on established religion. This could be when it was still in its grassroots, because it started from like a Bible study group.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I do remember hearing that in the documentary. Like, it wasn't... I don't know. I guess all religions have to start somewhere,
Yeah.
Our next prediction comes from the world infamous Jim Jones, founder of the People's Temple. Now, he said that he had a vision of a nuclear holocaust that was going to take place in 1967. Again, he made a big mistake there because he's predicting at a time when he would definitely still be alive. And I think this was fairly early into his ministry. I don't remember his whole history. Jim Jones, for the people who are listening and either don't know or don't remember, he had a church that he started called the People's Temple, and this became like a big deal for him. He started off doing like really good works. Actually, he was like way into desegregation and equal rights and that kind of thing. But like most cult leaders, there were some serious issues with Jim Jones, and he took his people out to Guyana, and they lived in isolation, and eventually he convinced them all to kill themselves by drinking some flavored water, which also had poison in it. And I forget the number, but it's a lot.
I want to, it's like 900 or so.
It's a lot. It's hundreds, yeah.
Yeah, that I'm about maybe an hour and a half or so south of where the Northern California Jonestown piece happened. My first husband was from much closer to there, and he tells this story of a comedian coming to their high school in, I guess, the 80s and doing like Jonestown material. I'm doing quotes. Mm-hmm. And people like in his class going, no, that was my family member. And if you watch, I assume you've watched that documentary. I can't remember.
Paradise Lost.
Yes. Oh my God, where they're injecting the cyanide, like in the guy is saying like they injected cyanide right into my baby son's mouth, like while I stood. Oh my God.
And it's all audio recording, so you can hear.
Yes, it's horrible, horrible, horrible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he did make an end of the world much later than he said, but he did create it for themselves. Very sad story. Speaking of sad stories, our next person, also a bit of a cult leader. It's a little iffy on whether you can count this as an end of the world prediction or not, but Charles Manson, who I've talked about extensively on this show, this whole, I think, what did it end up being, 6-part series?
Oh my God, it was incredible.
Thank you.
But yeah, he did predict that Helter Skelter, which was a race war, which would lead to the end of the world as we know it, would start in 1969. There's some debate about whether he even said any of that. There's some debate whether he meant it or not. There's some debate whether it would mean the end of the world, because, of course, at the end, he doesn't predict that the world's going to end. He predicts that him and his family, his group of followers, are going to come out of a cave and take over running the world. So I don't think that's really like an end of the world situation, although I guess it's end of the world as we know it.
Yeah, that's something like that's like a Mad Max kind of situation, kind of apocalypse. Not per se the end, but a breakdown of society or something.
Yeah, more closer to what we're dealing with right now.
Exactly right.
I was thinking about that. I've seen people posting those memes of like what I thought my end of the world outfit would be and what it actually is. And it's like a picture of like a badass barbarian, like, road warrior. And then it's a picture of like someone in their sweatpants. But I'm saying, like, who's stopping us?
Like, we could.
That's the thing. It's all opportunity.
Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll get like a...
Well, now where am I going to go to buy it? Can't go anywhere.
Well...
I'll just have to craft something.
I mean, or maybe it's time to go in the costume bin.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And not every adult probably has a costume bin, but I'm sure you do. As the Salem Witch. Yeah, I mean.
All right, next is another one that you may or may not consider an end of the world prediction, but it certainly was the end of their world. And this is the first one that I have recorded here that happened within my lifetime. This is Marshall Applewhite.
Leader of the Heaven's Gate cult.
Oh my God, so sad.
Another very sad story. Don't join cults, you guys.
You guys do not. And like, can we do a quick Tiger King sidebar?
Yeah.
Have you been watching it?
Yeah, I just finished it over the weekend, yeah.
Oh my God, Doc Antle fully has a cult.
Oh yeah.
And like I saw the news yesterday said he was still giving tours during the coronavirus. Oh my God, those women who are just living there, like going, well, if you have sex with them, you get to sleep inside.
Yeah. Look, to me, the lesson in that is if you want to start a cult, it's pretty easy.
Seriously.
You will find damaged people.
Don't cost as much as you think.
No,
yeah, I was surprised by that too.
I mean, like when he was walking around going, this, like 2 tiger cubs is $5,000.
Yeah, I was like, that seems like it should be like 10 grand at least.
Yeah, exactly. Like either you're underselling or I'm in the wrong line of work. Not really, listeners. I would never abuse animals, really, but times are desperate.
All right, getting back to Mr. Applewhite. Yes, he had his own cult, the Heaven's Gate cult. And they, again, it's a little debatable whether they thought this was the end of the world, but they believed that riding on the back of this comet would be the only way to be taken to, quote, a level of existence above human. And apparently, in order to do this, they had to shave their heads, cut off their genitalia, and then Mr. Applewhite and 38 of his followers put on some Nikes, I believe they were, put a purple cloth over their face, laid down, and died in their compound. I assume they took some kind of poison.
And they each had I want to say it's $5.25, or it's $5 and change for what they believed was going to be bus fare, or maybe it's rocket fare, or
on the comet, I guess.
Yeah, exactly right, for their transit fare.
I don't know, it's sad because you want to crack wise about it, but on the other hand, these are real people. It wasn't that long ago.
If someone tells you to cut off a part of your body, don't do it. I mean, unless it's a doctor and you've gone through and thought about it and it's, some appropriate medical procedure. But
another controversial one, but a very famous one. Actually, this person is someone we should be doing a full-on episode about pretty soon, by the name of Nostradamus.
Oh.
Now, Nostradamus is a famed, he was French, right? I believe he was French.
I believe you. I honestly don't know, but I'll believe you. Feels French.
Nostradamus was a famed prognosticator, and he wrote little poems, quatrains, and, they say, always in hindsight, mind you, that they predict all these things. And I remember being especially scared of this quatrain that they're talking about here when I was a child, when I was growing up, because both of my brothers were into the occult growing up. It was kind of a thing in the 80s, satanic panic and all. And we had Nostradamus books and everything, and my brother would tell me about it, and he'd say, oh, he says this is going to happen, this and this. And usually he didn't give very specific dates, but there is a quatrain in which he states that a king of terror would come from the sky in quote, 1999 and 7 months. So it's open to interpretation, but a lot of people say, well, clearly he is saying that there is going to be some kind of doomsday event in July of 1999.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a kid, when the first Gulf War broke out, Desert Storm, this was being made a big deal, and I was super, super afraid that this was going to be the end of the world war. So he got me when I was a little kid.
Oh, isn't that funny?
They were saying, the people who believed in it, they were saying, no, these are the predictions. Yes, this war is starting now, but that means by 1999 it's going to escalate so much that someone's going to be using nuclear technology, and that is the King of Terror that'll be coming from the sky.
I'm curious as to whether anybody tried to tie Y2K to that one.
I'm sure. Well, I know that he deserves his own episode, like I said. I know that they tried to retrofit 9/11 to one of them. And there's a bunch of things. I bet there was, but then when Y2K didn't happen, it just kind of got forgot about. But I bet there are people out there, if you find some old news clips or something from 1999, I bet there's people saying, no, Nostradamus said this was going to happen.
Oh, bless all those people's hearts who were working so hard to protect us from nothing happening.
Well, that was another thing we were all nervous about, but oh well. We got through it. We'll get through this too. All right, then a woman named Jean Dixon. She was a famous psychic because she had a newspaper column, which, of course, why wouldn't you if you're a famous psychic?
Obviously.
And she actually predicts that the end of the world will happen this year, 2020. But hold on, there's good news. She had previously predicted that the world would end very specifically on February 4th, 1962. So she's been wrong before, so hopefully she was wrong about this too. Although, the year's new, and we're not off to a great start.
That's exactly right. Oh, well, we're keeping our eye on 2020 anyways.
Yeah.
So now the question is, who believes these prognosticators? And in polls conducted, this was back in 2012. It'd be interesting to see what they have to say about it now. But these polls conducted in 2012 found that 22% of the United States citizens believe that the world will end within their lifetime. And I have to say, I don't think I would have said yes to that.
That's interesting because it makes me wonder if there's something about that what you mentioned earlier about people like kind of want like living in the excitement of the end of the world, that they just believe they're going to be a part of a significant event.
Well, honestly, one thing, if the world is ending, like the way I look at it is, there's two things. Either A, the world's not ending and everything's going to be fine. We're going to get back to normal eventually, most of us. So that's good. On the other hand, if this is the end of the world, isn't it kind of nice that you get to see how the story of the human race ends? Like you're here for the end of it?
Well, and that's something that I've given thought to before. We had our town had a kind of devastating wildfires in 2017, and we had that seemed like the most devastating thing that was going to happen to us before this, but I had this moment of kind of like with the way that we dealt with it in the immediate piece was we all had to, like my whole family had to evacuate to the same place. And that meant me, my husband, my kids, my parents, my ex-husband, his wife, and their daughter all living in my office building. And at that time, I was really like, I'm really pleased with how we're able to like just mobilize this group of people together, get us down here as fast as we did and just get it going. And it was, I get along with my ex great and everything, but it was, I was just really kind of like, okay, we dealt with the end of the world, now we've got it covered. And there's ways in which like I secretly have always dreamed of homeschooling my kids and working from home and basically just hanging out with my animals and never leaving. There's a little bit of be careful what you wish for, but there's a way in which the end of the world could be a lot worse if this is what it turns into, or this is what it is, and I don't know. Yeah, there is something about kind of just seeing how it plays out and how you interact, and then watching how other people, like what it brings out in other people. It's interesting.
Most of my friends are theater people. So on Facebook, everybody's just singing at each other. I haven't made any singing videos yet, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's a thing that's happening.
Yeah. The lawyer's jokes are pretty dry. But that's just lawyer jokes.
So let's go back to talking about who believes in this kind of thing. Like we said, 22% of the citizens of the United States back in 2012 did. I bet right now, specifically, that number is probably bumped up. But otherwise, I would have said it was lower than that. Like, you really think the world's going to end in your time? But I guess people do. They say...
Why are you having kids? Like, if that's true, why are you having kids?
Yeah. They say that people who believe the end of the world is coming within their lifetime, they tend to have not graduated college. They tend to come from low-income households. And you are more likely to believe that the world will end in your lifetime if you are under the age of 35, which seems pretty young to me.
Oh, but
I guess by 35, you've just had enough life experience that you're just like, whatever. It's fine. It's going to be fine.
Well, and you don't necessarily think you're the, you don't think that you're not in that Truman Show kind of world that you're in when you're younger, like where you think you're going to be present for everything that happens in the world. Like it's not all about you anymore.
Yeah.
The general public believed that when they were asked these questions, they believed that the likeliest cause of the end of the world would be nuclear war.
Remind me when the 2012. Yeah, that, I mean,
that's a concern.
Yeah.
That's another thing I remember being very concerned about when I was a kid.
In the 80s, that was like, because we had the day after was pardon me, excuse me. The day after was terrifying. I have the name of that right?
That is a thing. Well, there's the day after tomorrow, but that's something different, right?
That's a more recent movie. Yeah. Little what's his name?
Yeah.
So, and I'm thinking of that 80s TV movie.
Right. No, I know what you're talking about. I haven't seen it.
Oh my God, it's terrifying.
I was too young at the time.
There's it is, I mean, I could walk you through it. We could do an episode about it sometime if you want to. But it is absolutely what we believed it was going to be like, and it was terrifying.
Yeah.
They say that things come around in cycles, right? So when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s as a kid, my parents' generation were the 50s and 60s, right? So I think a lot of things on the TV reflected the 50s and 60s, right? Yeah. So a lot of I remember specifically Quantum Leap did an episode where Sam leaped into someone who was terrified of the A-bomb and had a bunker underground, and they showed that duck and cover video.
Oh God.
And I think even in the movie Great Balls of Fire, maybe, I used to love that movie. I used to watch it all the time, even though kind of inappropriate for a kid, but loved it, and I loved rock and roll, and I still do. But I believe there's a scene where they show that video in that too. So I was just like, man, why? We got to be ready for nuclear war. So I understand that fear, but it's funny that a lot of the experts who were, asked about this in this, and when they say experts, I don't know exactly who they mean by that, but it said when experts who were educated people were asked how they thought the end of the world was going to come, they said most commonly artificial intelligence. The Terminator.
Oh.
I mean, they didn't say the Terminator, but I imagine that's kind of what they're at.
I think that one doesn't seem very likely to me.
No. I mean, not. That's a longer term. I mean, the only. Yeah. I don't see that per se. I mean, I could see kind of, as people's jobs get automated, like the economy having to, or just the basic structure of the economy having to change. But the end of the world as a result of AI is something quite a little bit different.
Yeah.
Now, 16% of Americans that, believed in the end of the world thought that it would end due to Christ's return and the final judgment. So of the 22%, 16% of those people thought that, it was going to be because of Jesus or something having to do with Jesus. So again, we see a very strong religious component in this, but the next one, and perhaps the most interesting of all of them, between 1 and 3% of Americans said that the apocalypse would be caused by either a zombie infestation or an alien invasion. And what I find interesting, especially now, but even if this wasn't happening, I think it still would have occurred to me, no mention of a virus.
Right. And there nothing even similar to that? Nothing like a pandemic, we're going straight to zombies?
Yeah.
All right, people of the world.
Zombieism can be caused by a virus in theory.
Sure. Yes. In movies that we've seen, the rage virus.
Well, okay, so Susan, this brings up an interesting point, and we've actually been talking for quite a while. I think we're gonna have to make this one a two-parter.
If you've got the time.
Yep.
Maybe a 1.5, or anyway, because I have a lot of notes left here on the next subject I want to talk about, but we've already been at it almost an hour here.
So, well, I'm working from home. I've got the time. The people need to hear us.
Because what I want to talk about is why we can laugh at the alien and zombie theory, but the United States government does not.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, tell me.
So hold on. We're gonna pause there. You and I will keep talking, but everyone else will have to come back. I won't put a 2-week buffer between these episodes. I'll put the next one right out next week, but we're gonna pause our conversation there and come back probably with kind of a mini episode next time, finishing up this conversation. But until then, I want to remind everyone one more time, check out the website spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. Please leave your kindly worded likes and reviews on whatever medium you happen to be listening from. And Susan, thank you for being here once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And until next time, try really, really hard. Don't be afraid.